The coil was 2 inches longer than it had been that morning. Otis Farrow knew because he'd marked the floor himself, twice, just to be sure his eyes weren't playing tricks after 12 hours alone in that shed. Now the chalk mark meant nothing. Now he was standing under the rafters of the Widow's Reach rope walk at 2 a.m, flashlight shaking in his hand, watching the rope sway, though every window in the building was shut tight, and there wasn't a breath of wind in the whole hollow. It didn't swing like something loose in a draft. It swung like something testing how much weight it could hold. He'd been told not to touch it. He'd been told more than that, never to count it twice in the same day. He'd counted it 3 times since supper. Somewhere above him, in the black gap between 2 beams, something shifted its grip, slow and deliberate, the way a hand resettles before it commits to a climb. But that's getting ahead of things. Let's go back to the start, the way Otis told it to me himself, sitting on his own porch 3 counties over, with the shed key still zipped inside his coat pocket, refusing outright to go back for the rest of his tools. Name's Silas Vance. Most folks just call me Abe. And if you've been sitting with me a while now, settling in most nights for one more file out of these hollows, then you already know I don't rush a thing. I let a story find its own pace. So get comfortable. This one takes its time getting where it's going, same as the rope did. Otis Farrow surveyed old buildings for a living. Barns, mills, churches, too far gone for anybody but a historical foundation to care about. That was his work, and he was good at it, careful with it. The kind of man who photographed a rotted joist from 6 angles before he'd write one word about condemning it. When the county foundation called him about a rope walk out past Widow's Reach, he almost turned it down anyway. He had 2 other jobs stacked up that month, and rope walks were rare enough that he'd only ever read about them in trade journals, never actually stood inside one. A rope walk isn't built like a barn. It's a long, narrow shed, sometimes 200 or 300 feet end to end, built that way because rope has to be twisted in a straight line, strand over strand, the whole length of what you mean to make. It's slow work. It's old work. Most of the rope walks in the country came down decades ago, replaced by machines that could do in an hour what used to take a man all day. And the ones still standing were mostly ruins, roofs caved, walls leaning. This one, the foundation told him, was different. This one had stood mostly intact since the Coe family built it, sometime before anybody kept good written records of the hollow. And it had made rope for the county for 4 generations, right up until the Coes stopped selling it sometime in the 1960s and just let the building sit, locked, untouched, gathering hemp dust in the dark. The land was going up for sale. The last heir wanted the old shed gone before a buyer saw it and got nervous about liability. Or worse, got curious enough to poke around inside it. Otis's job was simple, on paper. Walk the building, document what stood, tell the foundation whether any of it was worth saving before the bulldozers came through in the spring. He met the caretaker on his first morning, a gray morning that never quite burned off the ridge above the property. Her name was Mercer Coe, an elderly woman who still lived alone in the farmhouse up the rise, the last of the family with any real claim to the place. She met him at the shed door with a key on a leather cord around her neck, and she was polite, the way people are polite when they've decided ahead of time exactly how much of themselves they're willing to give you. Otis said later that her politeness came with a warning folded up inside it, like a note tucked into the lining of a coat. You'll find one coil finished and hanging in the rafters, about 2/3 of the way down the walk, Mercer Coe told him, standing in the doorway like she didn't plan on stepping past it herself. Nobody's touched it in 60 years. You leave it be. Photograph it if you have to. Write it down in your book if you have to. But you don't touch it. And whatever you do, don't count it more than once in a day. Otis asked her why, mostly out of habit. It was half his job to collect the stories that came bundled with old buildings. Mercer Coe told him her grandfather used to say a rope remembers every hand that ever worked it, every strand that ever passed through a man's palms. And a rope that never got sold and never got used just kept on remembering, over and over, with nobody left to hand it off to. She said it the way you say something you've said 100 times before, worn smooth at the edges, the way old warnings get when a family's been repeating them for generations without anybody quite remembering the first telling. Otis wrote it down in his notebook anyway, the same as he wrote down every piece of local folklore that came bundled with an old building. He thought it was color for his final report. He thought, and he told me this plainly, sitting on his porch weeks later, that it was the kind of thing you nodded at politely and then forgot by supper. He walked the rope walk that first afternoon with a tape measure, a camera, and his notebook, and it was every bit as strange and beautiful as he'd hoped it would be. 310 feet of narrow shed, the old twisting wheel still bolted to the far wall, spools and hooks still hanging from their pegs exactly where the last coal to work the place had left them. Hemp dust hung suspended in the light that came through the high, narrow windows, drifting slow, like the whole building was still breathing it in and letting it back out on its own unhurried schedule. And there, exactly where Mercer Coe told him it would be, was the coil. It hung from a heavy iron hook driven deep into the rafter, thick as Otis's forearm, twisted so tight and so even along its whole length that it looked less like a finished piece of rope and more like a sculpture somebody had carved to resemble one. He measured it, out of professional thoroughness more than anything else. 61 feet, coiled down into a bundle about 2 feet across. He wrote the number into his notebook. 61 feet. Widow's Reach Rope Walk. Cole family. Coil. Unsold. Condition excellent. That was the only time that first day he measured it. By his second night on the property, Otis had set up a cot in the old foreman's office at the front of the shed, telling himself it was purely for convenience, that the 40-minute drive back into town wasn't worth doing twice a day when he had that much building left to document. Really, he admitted to me later, he just wanted more time alone with it. It was the best preserved rope walk anybody in 3 states had documented in decades. And some part of him, the part that had chosen this strange, careful, dying profession in the first place, wanted to sit with it after hours, the way you'd want to sit up late with something you loved. Around midnight, something woke him. Not a loud sound. The shed didn't make loud sounds, not even in a hard wind. The walls too thick and too old for that. This was a slow wooden creak, rhythmic, coming from the far end of the walk, from the direction of the twisting wheel bolted to the wall. Otis lay still on his cot and listened to it turn. Once, twice, 3 times. The same unhurried creak a wheel makes when a hand is working it deliberately, patiently, not by accident, and not by any wind. Then it stopped, all at once, mid-turn. He told himself it was the building settling. Old wood does that, he told himself. Old iron does that. And he went back to sleep telling himself that. The way a careful man convinces himself of the ordinary explanation because the alternative doesn't fit anywhere in his notebook. In the morning, he walked the length of the shed with his coffee, and out of nothing but old habit, the same habit that made him double-check every measurement he'd ever taken in his career, he looked up at the coil and counted the loops. 62 feet. He stood there a long moment, doing the math a second time, certain he'd miscounted. Certain the tape measure from the day before had been read wrong in bad light. It hadn't been wrong. He'd measured carefully both times, and the coil was a full foot longer than it had been the day before. And rope does not do that. Rope frays under weight. Rope wears thin with age. Rope does not grow in the dark while a building sleeps. He counted it again that afternoon, twice more before dinner, each time telling himself he was only confirming a mistake somewhere in his own notes, some transposed number, some error in his own careful hand. Mercer Coe's warning came back to him somewhere in the second count. Don't count it more than once in a day. And he remembered thinking, with the particular confidence of a man used to being the most careful person in any old building he'd ever stood inside, that folklore was folklore, and measurements were measurements. And he trusted the tape in his hand a great deal more than he trusted a family superstition passed down, mostly, he assumed, for the entertainment of visitors. That was the night he woke at 2 a.m. and found the coil swaying with no wind behind it at all. He didn't touch it. He didn't run either, not right away. Otis was not, by his own account, an easily rattled man, not after 15 years of standing alone in condemned buildings other people wouldn't set foot in. He stood at the base of the rafter with his flashlight aimed up into the dark between the beams, and he watched the coil sway, slower and slower still, the way a thing settles when it knows for certain it's being watched. Then it stopped completely, all at once, the same way the wheel had stopped the night before, mid-motion, like something had simply decided to hold still. The shed went dead quiet around him, quieter than a building has any right to be. Quiet enough that Otis said afterward he could hear his own pulse working in his ears, steady and much too loud. He backed out of the rope walk without turning off his light, and without ever quite turning his back on the rafters, all 310 feet of them stretching away behind him into the dark. And he did not sleep again that night. The next morning he went looking for the shed's old records, telling himself there might be a maintenance log somewhere, some practical, boring paper explanation buried in a drawer. What he found instead, tucked into a rusted metal box behind the foreman's desk, was a ledger. Decades of entries, written in a dozen different hands across a dozen different decades, all keeping the same simple record. A date, a length in feet, and a set of initials. T. Co. R. Co. M. Co. The numbers climbed slowly across the years, a foot here, 2 feet there, never once shrinking, always the same coil, always the same short rule copied out fresh across the inside cover in faded ink, generation after generation, like a debt nobody wanted to be the one to forget. Count once, first light, never again till morning. The last entry in the ledger was dated the spring of 1961. No length was written beside it, just a set of initials, and beneath them, in a different, unsteadier hand, a single line that Otis read 3 times before he let himself close the book. He counted twice on a dare. We don't talk about what came down. Otis Farrow sat with that ledger a long while before he made himself walk back out into the rope walk that afternoon. And when he did, he found the coil had grown again. 65 feet now, hanging heavier on its hook than it had any business hanging. And the bottom loop, the one nearest the floor, looked different up close than it had 2 days before. Frayed. In a particular way rope frays when something has been climbing it, hand over hand, testing its hold against the weight of a body, over and over, learning exactly how much it could bear. He told the Foundation over the phone that he needed 1 more day before he'd finish his report. He told Mercer Cole nothing at all. Mostly, he admitted, because he didn't trust himself yet to say it out loud without sounding like a man who'd spent too many nights alone in an old building. And on his 3rd night in the rope walk, he woke at 2 a.m. to the creak of the twisting wheel turning on its own again, slow and even. The same unhurried rhythm a hand makes when it's in absolutely no hurry, when it has all the time in the world and knows it.
If this is your first file with us tonight, welcome to the archive. And if you've been with me a while, you already know we don't miss a Wednesday, a Friday, or a Sunday, no matter how long the nights get out here in these hollows.
Otis didn't go to the wheel this time. He went to the coil instead, drawn there the way you're drawn to check a sound you already know in your bones you don't want confirmed. And he found it swaying again in the dark, testing its own slack against nothing he could see. Longer now than the rafter it hung from, its lowest loop pooling out across the floorboards like it had finally found enough of itself to reach the ground. He said the frayed end moved once while he stood there watching it, slow and deliberate, the exact way a hand tightens its grip on something right before it commits its full weight and pulls. He didn't stay to measure it. He left the shed that night with his cot still made and half his equipment still sitting inside. And he drove the 3 counties home without stopping once. Not for gas, not for anything. And he has not gone back for the rest of his tools since. Not even for the notebook with 60 years of careful measurements still sitting inside it. The Foundation eventually sent someone else out to finish the survey. Whoever they sent reported the coil at 61 feet even, same as Otis's very first measurement, like none of the rest of it had ever happened at all. Like the building had simply reset itself back to where a stranger's eyes would find it ordinary. Mercer Cole still lives alone in the farmhouse on the rise above the property. She still tells anyone who bothers to ask that a rope remembers every hand that ever worked it, and that a rope nobody's ever sold just keeps on remembering, over and over, counting right along with whoever's fool enough or curious enough or careful enough in all the wrong ways to count it back. The land at Widow's Reach never did sell. The rope walk is still standing out there tonight. 310 feet of hemp dust and quiet dark. The old twisting wheel bolted to the wall the same as it's always been. The coil hanging exactly where it has always hung. If you ever find yourself out that way, down some gravel road past a ridge that never quite loses its fog, and you come across an old shed with one coil hanging inside it, looking harmless, looking finished, looking like nothing more than 60 years of forgotten work. You go on and look at it once, just the once. Let that be enough for you. This has been Silas Vance, and you can call me Abe the same as everybody else around here does. Signing off from the Redacted Archives for tonight. Rest easy out there in the dark, and whatever you do, don't count it twice.